Welcome to Shasikara's astrological series. This is a presentation about the possibility of the next prime minister in India. In India, the parliamentary elections is going to happen somewhere in April and May of 2024. And this is the second part. In the first part, I did analyze the birth chart of one of the BJP candidate leader, Amit Shah, and provided my astrological analysis if there is a possibility for him to be the next Prime Minister of India. This is the second candidate I'm going through, and the candidate is the granddaughter of late India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Her name is Priyanka Gandhi Vadra. And I'm going to analyze her birth chart based upon the birth details that I could find in Astro Data Bank, and using those birth details to the best of my knowledge, I'm going to explain if there is a possibility for this particular candidate to become the next Prime Minister of India. Uh, please take this presentation, use this presentation for educational purposes only. And as usual, the disclaimer is the same. I'm not responsible for any outcome whatsoever it may be after viewing this presentation. And thank you very much and enjoy the presentation.
Let me start analyzing the birth chart of this particular native. The birth details that I got is from the Astro Data Bank website. According to the website, the native was born on 12th January 1972 at 5 o'clock in the evening in New Delhi. And the website also provided a sort of a proof which I have included it here. It's some sort of an information from the Holy Family Hospital in New Delhi, indicating that the baby girl was born on 12th January at 1972 at 5 p.m. to Sonia Gandhi. The important events this particular native had in her life as of now is she got married to a Christian, Robert Vadra, on 18th February 1999. Priyanka Gandhi is a traditional Kashmiri Brahmin. She belongs to a traditional Kashmiri Brahmin family. Her great grandfather, Jawaharlal Nehru, is a Kashmiri Brahmin. Her grandmother married to a Muslim. Her father married to a Christian, and now the native got married to another Christian family. So you can see that the past 3 generations, it was an intercaste or an interreligion marriage. And that this is something that you have to keep in mind when we are looking at the chart. What are the family tradition, and based on that you can guess what could be the native's intentions. The native was married in 1999 February. The native had a first baby in August 2000, another baby in June 2002. The native have only one sibling, Rahul Gandhi, who is, if I remember correctly, is the current president of the Congress I in India. Uh, Apart from that, this is the basic information that I got it from Astro Data Bank website. Using the birth details that I got it over there, I'm going to generate the chart and then analyze the chart based upon to the best of my astrological knowledge. So the birth details is 12th January 1972 at 17:05 hours in New Delhi. Using JHora software, this is the birth chart that I could get it. When I look at it, the Lagna is Gemini, the Lagnadipati is Mercury. First and the fourth house lord is Mercury, and Mercury is in the seventh house. So Mercury, the Lagnadipati, is having a direct aspect on his own house, the very first house. And then comes the second house lord is Moon. Moon is in fifth house, and Ketu is in the second house. The third house lord is Sun, fourth house lord is Mercury. They both are in the seventh house. Fifth house lord is Venus, Venus is in the 9th house owned by Saturn. 6th and the 11th house lord is Mars, and Mars is in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna and 6th house from Chandra Lagna. And then the 7th house lord is Jupiter. Actually 7th and 10th house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter is residing in its own house. Jupiter is co-joined with the 1st house lord Mercury and the 3rd house lord Sun. And then the 8th and 9th house lords are Saturn. Saturn is in the 12th house. Rahu is in the 8th house. That means it is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. Venus is in the 9th house. That means it's having a direct aspect on the 3rd house. And in the 10th house we have Mars. 11th house is empty, and the 12th house owned by Venus is Saturn is residing. The very first thing that I can see from seeing here, the very first thing that I can tell is Venus and Saturn, they both are having a Parivartana Yoga. This is the very first thing that I can say by looking at the chart. The second thing is Jupiter is in Rashi Lagna. It is only 1 degree in Sagittarius. Jupiter is a very slow moving planet. So even though if you take half an hour or 1 hour plus or minus half an hour from the time of birth that you was given, then the degrees will not change. So we can ignore Jupiter being in Rashi Sandhi. The next is Venus. Venus is 0 degrees. That means it's almost close to almost in the 8th house, close co-joining with the Rahu, because if you look at Rahu is in 12 degrees Capricorn. That means it's in the center of the house, and Venus will be somewhere, if there is a change in time of birth, then Venus will be somewhere like 29 degrees in Capricorn, just approximately 14 degrees away from Rahu. So Venus is co-joined with Rahu if we consider Venus in Capricorn, and that's another disadvantage in this chart. And then comes another slow moving planet. Saturn is at 6 degrees, and just like Jupiter, Saturn is also a slow moving planet, so I'm ignoring the position of that being in Rashi Sandhi. And the last thing I want to see is Mercury. Mercury is 6 degrees in Sagittarius too, but the Mercury is a fast moving planet. So the chances for Mercury to be in the previous house, that is Scorpio, that means the 6th house, is high if the time of birth that was shown here is not correct. So with a grain of salt, I'm going to consider Mercury. Just like Venus, I'm going to consider Mercury in both the houses while doing the analysis. That means I will consider Mercury first in Sagittarius, I do the analysis. Consider Mercury in Scorpio, do the analysis. Consider Venus in Aquarius, do the analysis, and consider Venus in Capricorn, do the analysis. So this particular chart is so complicated that since 2 planets are in Rashi Sandhi, you are going to have 4 types of charts, 4 charts, and so it is a little bit challenging to tell exactly which chart is the right chart for this particular native. That's another reason why the native, even though the chart looks so challenging, it's not only that the chart is looking challenging, since the chances are extremely high, but still the native in the real life, the destiny of the native doesn't seem to be what the chart is showing. Let me go in detail and explain what are the flaws in the chart first, and then I will start my predictions. Let me start analyzing the native's birth chart. The chart was developed using the Jehora software. The date of birth is 12th January 1972 at 5:05 p.m. in New Delhi. Place of birth is New Delhi. So as soon as I generated the chart, the very first thing I look is what is the Lagna, Rasi Lagna. The Rasi Lagna is Gemini. That means Mercury is the lord of the Lagna, or Mercury is the Lagnadipati. And fortunately, the Rasi Lagna is 20 degrees. That means there is no Lagna Sandhi here. That's the first and the foremost thing to look at. Is there a Lagna Sandhi? If it is there, then the way at least I analyze varies from the normal. normal charts that I usually look at it. For this particular native, there is no Lagna Sandhi. So that means I can go ahead and look at the chart without a second opinion. So the first or the fourth house lord is Mercury. Mercury is residing in the seventh house owned by Jupiter, and Mercury is co-joined with the seventh and 10th house lord Jupiter, and also the third house lord Sun, and they all are having a direct aspect on the first house. So this tells you that Mercury indicates communications. And that too co-joined with the 10th house lord Jupiter, it indicates that that particular native is very skilled in when it comes to communications. And because the 10th house lord is Jupiter, it usually this type of combination usually indicates that the native, whoever that native is skilled to become a school teacher or a professor, someone who preaches as a preacher. And so that's just by looking at the first house lord being combined with the 10th house lord and the third house lord Sun. Because the third house indicates Bhatrusthanamo, it does tell that the third house lord, her native, her brother or sister, or whatever the siblings, will be in some sort of a leadership position, because Sun, the leader, is the third house lord, and it has co-joined with the first house lord and also the native's 10th house lord. Next comes the second house. The second house lord is Moon. If you look at it, Moon being the Kutumba Sthanadipati, second house is Kutumba Sthan, is one of the most good combinations for a native. Moon being the Kutumba Sthanadipati. So let's go and look where is Moon. Moon is residing in Scorpio. That means Moon is debilitated there. It's in Nicha. So the second house lord is in Nicha Sthanamo, is one of the biggest flaw that I could see in this chart. And then in the second house there is Ketu is residing. If Ketu is residing in the second house, means Rahu is in the 8th house having a direct aspect of the second house. Rahu having a direct aspect on any house indicates some unstable situations pertaining to that house bhava. So here it is a second house, indicates that the native, there's a possibility for the native to have some unstable situations that is pertaining to second house, which bhava, which is the dhanasthanam and the kutumbasthanam. The third house lord is Sun, third house is empty. Fourth house lord is Mercury, fourth is also empty. Fifth house lord is Venus, Venus is in the 9th house. So the fifth and the 12th house lord is Venus, who is residing in the 9th house, the Dharmasthanam and Bhagyasthanam too. So, and then the 6th house lord, 6th and 11th house lord is Mars, and Mars is residing in the 10th house. In the 6th house, as I said, Moon is residing, it is debilitated. In the 7th house, the 7th and 10th house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter is residing in its own house, the 7th house. That's a very good sign. Jupiter, but unfortunately Jupiter is the 7th house, deals with the Marakasthanam too. So the Marakasthanadipati is residing in its own house and looking at the directly looking at the Tanusthanam, the first house. That's another second flaw that I can see over here. The next is the 8th house. This is where the problem comes. The 8th and 9th house lord is Saturn. A malefic is owning the 8th and 9th houses, and now in the 8th house there's another malefic, Rahu, residing there. So when the house is owned by a malefic and another malefic is residing in that house, naturally the bhava of that house will be very high when it comes to negative side of it. So 8th house is secret affairs or secret dealings, so with where Rahu is residing. So we have no idea what it is, but since Rahu is having a direct aspect on the second house, again second house deals with Dhanasthanam too. So the secret dealings has a direct relationship with Dhanasthanam, and the secret dealings has a direct relationship with Kutumbasthanam. So let's stop there. Next comes is the 9th house. Venus is in the 9th house. Saturn is in the 12th house. If you look at it, first of all, Venus is in a Rasi Sandhi. It is only 1 degree in Aquarius. So there are two possibilities. If the native was born at 505 as shown, then Venus is in Rasi Sandhi. If the native was born 10, 15 or half an hour or 1 hour before, then the Venus would be in the 8th house co-join with Rahu. Whatever it is, the Venus is the one biggest is the Venus is the 5th and the 12th house lord, is the biggest negative, has a biggest and highest negative impact on this native's life. And there is a Parivartana Yoga between the malefic Saturn and the 5th and the 12th house Lord Venus. That's another negative here. Then comes the 10th house. Mars is the 11th and 6th house Lord residing in the 10th house. 6th house Lord residing in the 10th house always indicates that the native is have a career or a profession that is very close to the planet, say the Lord. So here the 6th and 11th house Lord Mars is residing in the 10th house, indicates that the native should have some profession that is close to that has a direct relationship with Mars, that is in the law and order, sorry, in the law enforcement or a military, or in something that deals with chemicals, something like that. And in the 12th house I see Saturn there. So as I said earlier, Saturn is having a Parivartana Yoga with Venus, but at the same time Saturn is also having an issue. There is an issue with respect to Saturn in the 12th house, which I'm going to talk when I'm going in detail about these planets aspects.
Let me start analyzing the aspects of the three important planets. The first and the foremost, as usual, I take is the Saturn. Saturn is the 8th and 9th house lord residing in the 12th house from Rashi Lagna. Then when you look from the Chandra Lagna, Saturn is the 3rd and the 4th house lord residing in the 7th house. So now let me go and look at the planets, Saturn transit, sorry, natal Saturn's aspects. Saturn's third aspect is on the 2nd house, which is the Kutumbasthanamu and Dhanasthanamu from Rashi Lagna. And there is Ketu, natal Ketu is residing there. So natal Rahu is directly looking at the 2nd house. Now natal Saturn's third aspect is also on the 2nd house. This indicates that the 2nd house is completely dynamic for this particular native, which is the Dhanasthanamu and the Kutumbasthanamu. Then Saturn's direct aspect is on the 6th house from Rashi Lagna. 6th house is employment conditions, illness, and death. That's where the 2nd house Lord Moon is debilitated or is in Nicha. So natal Saturn is directly looking at the house owned by Moon, and it also looking at Moon. So naturally the 2nd house became completely unstable and very much spoiled, I should say it that way, much spoiled. And then Saturn's 10th aspect, this is very important here. Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 9th house from Rashi Lagna. 9th house is Bhagyasthanamu and the Dharmasthanamu too. And if you look at it, there is in 9th house, there is Venus is residing, which owns the 12th house, and there's a Parivartana Yoga between Saturn and Venus, natal Saturn and natal Venus. So natal Saturn is residing in the house owned by Venus, and using its 10th aspect, it is looking at Venus, who is residing in the house owned by Saturn. Overall, just by looking at the natal Saturn's three aspects, what one can come to a sort of a conclusion is that the Moon, the 2nd house Lord Moon, and the 2nd house, both of them got badly affected. And then the Bhagyasthanamu, which is owned by Saturn, is being there. It has the 12th house Lord, 12th and 5th house Lord is residing there, Venus, which is also the natural 7th house Lord. So overall, Saturn has controlled the particular natives Bhagyasthanamu, Dharmasthanamu, Kutumbasthanamu, and Dhanasthanamu. The four important, and above all, Saturn is having a direct aspect on Moon, which is nothing but the native's mind. So this tells you that how bad this particular natal Saturn is having an impact on on the native. And so wherever the transit Saturn is, the impact will be amplified depending upon where the transit Saturn's position is, and also if there is a Antardasa or a Mahadasa of Saturn or Moon, which I'm going to discuss. The next thing that I look at is the another slow moving planet, Jupiter. Jupiter, for this particular native, Jupiter is the 7th and 10th house lord. So 10th house deals with career. So that's another reason why I was emphasizing Jupiter here. And also in the 7th house, the house owned by Jupiter, Jupiter is residing in the 7th house, its own house. And along with Jupiter, first and the 4th house lord Mercury is residing, and the 3rd house lord Sun is residing. That's third house is nothing but siblings. So that's the reason why you can see that the natives, the native has only one sibling, and that sibling is trying to either become the leader of the country or is currently being chosen as the leader of the Congress party, one of the biggest political party in India. So you can see that from this particular chart, from this native's chart, you can see what is the career or what will be the life of her sibling by looking at this chart. This is sometimes very useful. Like when you look at the chart, you can figure it out what the native siblings, which direction the native siblings might go. It just gives you a clear a picture from a higher altitude. Now coming back to Jupiter, natal Jupiter is in the 7th house. It has, as usual, 3 aspects. The 5th aspect, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th aspect is on the 11th house, Labhasthanamo, owned by Mars. And if you look at it, Mars is residing in the 10th house that is owned by Jupiter. So there is a bondage between Mars and Jupiter, because Jupiter is looking at the house owned by Mars and Mars is residing in the house owned by Jupiter. So Mars will not do any bad to Jupiter. That means career for this particular native. And so that way, Jupiter, when it looks at the Labhasthanam, it won't be having any negative impact on the Labhasthanam. The next thing is Jupiter's direct aspect is on the 1st house, which is the Dhanusthanamo, and the 1st house Lord Mercury is already residing here along with Jupiter. Jupiter's 9th aspect is on Sun, is on the 3rd house owned by Sun. Fortunately, the 3rd house is empty. So the 3rd house Lord Sun is also residing with Jupiter. So if you look at the Jupiter's aspects, Jupiter is co-joined with Mercury and the Sun. It is looking at that, aspecting the house owned by Mercury and Sun. And the other aspect that it has is on a house owned by Mars, and Mars is residing in the house owned by Jupiter. So you can see that the benefic planet Jupiter, this is another reason why the native has such a good future, or the life that the native is going through is very good because of this particular thing. Is Jupiter is the one, the most benefic planet is not having any relationship with any malefics. The only bondage it has is with Mars, an aggressive planet, but because of the way the Mars and Jupiter positions are set up here, the planetary in the chart, Mars will not do any harm to Jupiter, especially in the house that it is residing, which is the 10th house. That's another reason why the native had no major impact in her life when it comes to career, Labhasthanamo, Dhanusthanamo, and of course the siblings. The last natal planet that I look for when it comes to aspects is Mars. Here, the reason Mars is just like Jupiter and Saturn, Mars is also having 3 aspects. It aspects 3 houses. So let me start with it. Mars' 4th aspect is on the 1st house. Remember, Jupiter's direct aspect is already on the 1st house. So Mars' 4th aspect is now on the 1st house. There's already a bondage between Jupiter and Mars. Now they both are looking at the first house, which is the Dhanusthanamo. And then Mars direct aspect is on the fourth house. First and fourth houses are owned by Mercury. That means Mars is now looking at the houses owned by Mercury, both the houses owned by Mercury. And Mars' eighth aspect is on Libra, which is owned by Venus. It has nothing to do with it. So what you can see here is that because of aggressive, violent planet Mars, which owns the 11th and the 6th and 11th houses, is now looking at the first house and the fourth house. Both are owned by Mercury. And the first house is Dhanusthanama and the fourth is Sukhasthanama. So Mars looking at these two houses is again not a good sign. Remember, with Saturn looking at the third aspect of the second house is not a good sign. So Jupiter aspecting the first house is a good sign, and Mercury is looking at its own house. That's fine. And now Mars is looking at the first house and the fourth house is also not good sign. So 2 out of the 3 natal planets, 2 planets or aspects are not good when it comes to the native's routine day-to-day life, especially it is the Dhanusthanamo means self and the Kutumbasthanamo and the Sukhasthanamo. So it just tells you that how unstable the native's career or even in the life is when it comes to these particular parts of her life. So what I will be going to do is next, because this is especially pertaining to the career of the native. Let me go in detail to see how this career for this particular native looks like, especially for the month of April and May of 2024.
Let me go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa, especially when the Mahadasa is changed. If you look at the natives Vimsottari Dasa, Sun Mahadasa is starting in February of 2024 and that will last for 6 years. So the most important thing here you can see is Sun indicates the leadership. Sun is in the 7th house. 7th house sometimes deals with the profession too. And then Sun is co-joined with the 10th house lord. So the leader is co-joined with the 10th house lord in the 7th house, and the Sun is also co-joined with the 1st and the 4th house lord Mercury's communications. So overall the Mahadasa is very cooperative for this particular native to jump into politics and at least give it a try. And then if you look at the Antardasa, Antardasa is starting February of 2024 and goes all the way till June 2024. That's when the elections will be scheduled. If I remember correctly, it is somewhere, it's a 2-month process starting in April, ending in May. So overall, Sun Mahadasa and Sun Antardasa is the time when the elections is going to happen in India. And for this particular native, the Sun is in very strong position. Natal Sun is very strong, and generally during that time, that means in April and May, Sun will be exalted in Aries. Aries is the 11th house for this particular native from Rashi Lagna, and the 6th house from Chandra Lagna. And Aries Lord is Mars, and Mars is in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna. So it looks very promising for this particular native to win the elections. That's how the situation looks like. Then comes in June, when assuming that the election results were declared at somewhere in June of 2024. That's when the issue begins, because the Sun Antardasa is done by June of 19, and then the Moon Antardasa begins. As I said earlier, Moon is already debilitated, and it is in the 6th house from Rashi Lagna, and that is the house owned by Mars, who is in the 10th house. So 6th house deals with employment conditions and unexpected expenditures, debts and the illnesses too. So and sixth house here for this particular native is the sixth in moon is the second house lord here too. So even though the election before the elections, the trend seems to be the NATO being will be winning the elections, something happens and then that results into some sort of a disappointments for this particular NATO, especially in June. If I remember correctly, by June Sun will be either in Gemini in the first house having a direct aspect with the seventh house, the natal sun. Transit Sun will be having a direct aspect with the natal sun, so where you have the Jupiter and Mercury residing. But moon, the second house lord, is going to create some sort of a dynamic which is not that much encouraging. So even if the NATO had, the chances are very close to zero for the NATO to win the elections, but if the NATO wins with such a slim majority, it wins that the chances for the NATO to have a stable leadership role will be close to zero. And the another thing we have to look at here is the issue with respect to moon. From moon, 10th house lord is again sun. So the NATO has an intention to become a leader because the 10th house lord from moon is sun, and sun is in the second house from moon, which is okay, good sign. But unfortunately, if you look at it, the Rahu who is in the 8th house is having a direct aspect on the moon. So this particular Rahu might create some sort of a unexpected events that will have a negative impact on this particular NATO, especially when it comes to the career. Another thing I want to tell here is that Sun is a third house lord. Third house is siblings. So some sort of a similar impact will be happening for her sibling, which is her elder brother Rahul Gandhi. So maybe even if the NATO party wins, it wouldn't be that much easy for either the NATO or her sibling to become the next Prime Minister of India. After completing the transit analysis, let me go and look at the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, just in case. How does it look? What does it says? According to Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, what can we interpret? And if you hear, according to Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, in January 2023, the native will complete 51 years. That is the 52nd year is running in January 2023, and it lasts for one year. And during that period, Mars activates the fourth house from Rashi Lagna and the fourth house from its natal position. Good. Now let's see. In case if the NATO is interested to compete in April 2024 elections, the NATO has to start doing the election propaganda and then providing all that information starting somewhere in January 2023. So that means, according to Bihuru Chakrapaddhati, when Mars is a cycle ruler and when Mars is activating the fourth house from natal position and fourth house from Rashi Lagna, is when the NATO is going to do all those things. Let's go and look at Mars. As I said, Mars is in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna, so there is a possibility for the NATO to, from a career perspective, to look into thinking about standing in the elections as a candidate for whatever the party that she is supporting, and that is clearly visible. It is the Congress I, her grandmother's party. And now Mars residing in the 10th house is with its fourth aspect is already looking at the first house, and first house is Tanusthanamu. When a violent and aggressive planet is looking at the first house, the NATO will be very aggressive, very demanding and challenging, and that would be shown easily in the year 2023. For the whole year 2023, you can see the NATO taking all the challenges and will be a little bit aggressive and demanding, and will be particularly when she is doing all that election propaganda. And so in that 1 year, not only that natal Mars fourth aspect is on first house, it is also activating the first house. That clearly tells that the native is sure to get highly involved starting January 2023 with respect to the elections that is supposed to happen in April 2024. And then comes the next year, that is from January 2024 to January 2025. Mars activates the fifth house from its natal position. The fifth house from its natal position is the second house from Rashi Lagna. Second house, Dhanasthanamu and Kutumbasthanamu. Look at the impact of the second house. Natal Saturn's third aspect is already on the second house. Natal Rahu residing in the eighth house is already looking at the second house. And now Mars is activating the second house. And that second house is the house owned by Moon, and the owner Moon, the lord of the house Moon, is Nicha or is debilitated, and he is residing in the house owned by Mars too. So even though the Mars activates the second house from its natal position, because the house lord Moon is debilitated and is residing in the house owned by Mars, the activation will not be that much successful. Like I said in the Vimsotari Dasa and in other things in the whole presentation, that's what I keep saying, is that see, because the Moon is debilitated here, the second house got thoroughly spoiled, and so any planet activating the second house, we have to think twice, especially if the planet is an aggressive planet or a malefic planet. The second house will be extremely spoiled. And here Mars is the sixth and the 11th house lord Mars is activating this second house. So this tells you that somewhere in January of 2025 onwards, slowly her chances to win the election will slowly go down and down and down. And somewhere according to Vimsotari Dasa, when the Moon Antara Dasa starts in I think it was June of 2024, that's when completely the chances will be close to zero. I have checked the impact using the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati. The last thing that I do is look at the Bihuru Sarla Paddhati to see if what can I interpret using BSP rules. The very first thing, the BSP rule that I always look at is wherever Saturn resides, it always spoils or destroys the bhava of the house next to his residence, provided that house he does not own it. That means if Saturn is in Capricorn, the next house is Aquarius, but he will not spoil the bhava of the Aquarius because he owns the Aquarius. But if Saturn is in, now here for this particular natal Saturn is in Taurus, so the next house is Gemini. So it is going to spoil the house, the next house. So Saturn is residing in the 12th house. That means it is going to spoil the bhava or the characteristics of the first house, which is the Tanusthanamu. That's clearly visible here now. See, so that's the reason why the Tanusthanamu got spoiled by natal Saturn. Now, during the period that is in 2023, 2024, when the elections propaganda begins, election, and then the NATO is busy doing all that election campaigning, transit Saturn will be in Aquarius in its own house, but it is residing with Venus. Look at it. Natal Saturn is residing in the house owned by Venus. Transit Saturn is residing in its own house co-joined by Venus. So Venus became thoroughly spoiled here. Keep in mind, Venus is the 5th house lord and the 12th house lord. 12th house is unexpected expenditures and hospitalizations, all those things. So now transit Saturn, when it resides in Aquarius, it's going to spoil the house next to its residence, which is Pisces, or the 10th house from Rashi Lagna. 10th house is career. So that's where the 6th and 11th house lord Mars is residing. So transit Saturn, when it spoils that house, the 10th house, Mars, approximately during the same time, Mars is trying to activate the first house. Already natal Saturn has spoiled the first house. Now transit Saturn is going to spoil the 10th house. So the Bihuruga Sarla Paddhati rule, according to that rule, both transit and natal Saturns, when they spoil the house next to its their residences, it is going to have a major impact on the native because they are the first house and the 10th house. And then comes, let's go and look at the most other thing, other two rules when it pertains to age related Bihuruga Sarala Paddhati rules, that says that 50th at the age of 51, that means after the completion of 50th birthday and before the day before the 51st birthday is the age of 51 according to the Indian calendar, the way the Indians look at the ages. So that means starting January 22 till January 2023, that means starting next year onwards, what's going to do is Saturn, wherever he gives the results, so Saturn is in the 12th house, so he gives the results of the 12th house, which is just nothing but unexpected expenditures, and I don't know what more can it give. But and then if you look the same rule and look at the transit Saturn during that period will be in the 8th house, co-join with natal Rahu. So it's going to give its own results. That means 8th house deals with secret affairs and secret dealings, and they are both are looking at the second house Kutumbasthanamu and Dhanasthanamu, so something secrecy will be revealed. Rahu will not keep quiet even if it co-join with Saturn, and that to the Lord of the 8th house, it will not keep quiet. So something between January 2022 and January 2023, some secrecy will be revealed that will be very very closely related to the second house, which is the Dhanasthanamu and Kutumbasthanamu. And then in the same during the same period, that means between January 2022 and January 2023, Saturn, the other thing that Saturn does is it gives the results of its third aspect. So we'll consider the natal Saturn. Natal Saturn's third house, third aspect is on the second house, the same. See, transit Saturn is directly looking at the second house. Now natal Saturn is going to give the results of the third house. And then transit Saturn, when it is residing in the 8th house, the third house is the 10th house. So the secrecy that it is going to, Rahu is going to reveal, will have a very, very direct, strong and direct impact on, for the native, it will be the career. For the native, it will be the second house, which is the Kutumbasthanamu and Dhanasthanamu. So this 1 year from starting January 2022 till January 2023 is the turning point for this particular native uh, to have the negative impact of Saturn, very very bad and negative impact of the Saturn, and that negative Saturn's negative impact is going to will be they will be the whatever the negative impact that it gets initiated in 2022, between 2022 January and 2023 January, that's going to have a major impact in 2020 from 2023 January till 2024 of January. And that will be these 2 years from January 2022 to January 2024. These 2 years, whatever happens for this particular native will result in April or May of 2024, and that result will be something that makes her not become the leader of the country.
The next thing that I do is to superimpose the country's birth chart onto the native's birth chart and see the natal planets of the country's natal planets, and to which natal planets of for this particular native are they co-joining. Here, if you see it, the birth chart is the native's birth chart is over there, and on the top of the birth chart in the red color, you see the arrows and then the planet names. Those are the natal planets for the in Republic of India at the time of birth, that is 15th August 1947. whatever the planets were there, in whichever the houses were there, is what I have shown here. So that tells you that natal Rahu for the Republic of India is in Gemini, is in Taurus. That's where natal Saturn for this particular natal is residing. So Rahu of the country is co-joined with Saturn of the natal. The next is Mars of the country. Natal Mars for the country is now in the first house for the natal. That means the first house Lord Mercury is having a direct aspect on the Rahu of the natal country. And then the most important thing here is in Cancer, for in the chart of the Republic of India, in Cancer there are 5 planets: Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. There are all the 5 planets are residing there. And here, when you superimpose it with the native's chart, natal Ketu is now is in Cancer. That means natal Ketu is co-joined with all the 5 natal planets of the country, which indicates that natal Rahu of the native is having a direct aspect on all the 5 planets of the country. That's the biggest flaw here for this particular native. Rahu, if you look at it, natal Rahu, which is in Cancer, is having an aspect on the, which is living in Capricorn, is having a direct aspect on Cancer, and vice versa. Natal Saturn residing in Cancer for the country is now having a direct aspect on Capricorn, which is owned by Saturn itself. So this particular relationship between Rahu and Saturn is not a good sign. It doesn't look ethical for the person when it comes to the country. So this type of things is a little bit complicated when it comes to becoming the leader of the country. Also, Sun is now in Cancer too. Remember, the natal Sun for the Republic of India is in Cancer. So that means the Lord Moon is already debilitated for this particular native. So Sun is residing in that house owned by a Nicha. Okay, so that tells you that the native does not have the skills or the ability to become the leader, even though physically and emotionally the native wants it, but that the native will not have the confidence to become the leader of the country. And the another thing that you have to see here is, this is the reason why I said sometimes one chart can tell you a little bit about the native siblings. The native sibling tried to become the leader of the country earlier and failed it, which we all know it in 2014, I think, somewhere. I don't know when it was. That this is the reason, because the country's sun is in a house, Cancer, and the lord of that Cancer is Moon, who got debilitated here. So naturally, the sibling could not get that strength. This native chart is not providing any support to her sibling to become the leader of the country too. So neither the native can become the leader of the country, nor the native can provide a support to her sibling to become the leader of the country. And then comes Jupiter. Another planet is in Jupiter is in Libra. There's no need to worry about it, because and Mars 8th aspect is on Libra, and that's where the Jupiter is residing. So Jupiter is a good planet. Already we know that for this particular native, there's a relationship between Mars and Jupiter, and now the native's Mars is now having a relationship with the country's Jupiter either too. So that's okay. That's a moderate from sex. Now we go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa. What is the Vimsottari Dasa for the country, and what is the Vimsottari Dasa for the native? First and foremost, the Vimsottari Dasa for the country. It is the Moon Mahadasa that is started in 2015 and goes all the way till 2025. That's for the country. The Mahadasa is Moon, and there are 5 planets in the house owned by Moon. Okay, for the country. So when the Mahadasa 2015, the Mahadasa started, the thing starts to go down slowly. and depending upon which Antardasa does it come, and that will last all the way till 2025. And if you look at the time of elections, that is in April of 2024, it will be Venus Antardasa. Venus is already in Cancer for the country, and now Venus Antardasa is starting somewhere in 2023 June and goes all the way till 2025 February. So Venus is there. So one way it's not a good sign. Now let me go to the country from the natives Vimsotharitasa. I told you, natives country, the natives Vimsotharitasa is the Sun Mahadasa running. Sun Antardasa is until May of 2024 and then Moon Antardasa begins. So when the Sun and Mahadasa is running for the native, when you overlap it with the country, like I said, country's Sun is in Cancer. So even though the native Sun is showing some sort of a strength to become the leader, the country's Sun is not supporting the NATO to become the leader. So there will be some drag from the country in a macro view. So that even the NATO has all the emotions and the strength and the abilities, everything are there to become the leader, it will not make it happen. And also in the Vimsotharitasa of the NATO, as soon as the Sun Antardasa completes, the Moon Antardasa begins, and Moon is already debilitated, and it is in the same Moon's house that the 5 planets are residing for the country. So overall, the chances for this particular NATO to become the next leader is close to zero. Accidentally, if something happens, and then if the NATO does get some sort of a winning strike, but the stability is not at all. I don't see any stability in the country, in the NATO forming a stable government, and then it just collapses. Whatever it is, it hardly stays until May of 2024, maybe 15 days here and there. After that, the collapse will begin. So if the announcement is happened in somewhere in the end of May, and for this particular native, the Moon Antardasa starts in June of 10th. So those 10 days will be like a horse trading period for the native party, whatever the party the native choose to win. And then by the end of June 15th, the horse trading gets collapsed, and then whatever the NATO will not get the enough strength to sustain and form a government, and then again the government will, whatever the NATO will not have the ability to form the government at all. These are just by as predictions are based upon the analysis of this particular chart, and of course the transit planets.
Let me conclude this presentation with three major points that I want to tell here. First and the foremost, based upon the native's birth chart, whenever the native has decided, which I'm going to put a separate presentation about when would be the possible time for the native to announce that she is going to be participating in the parliamentary elections. But whenever she does it, until March or April of 2024, there will be some sort of an enthusiasm in both, not only in her involvement but also in the party that she represents, and she will be portrayed as the future of the country. Then in somewhere in April or May of 2024, give a plus or minus of 15 days, some secret dealings or some secret news or something secret reports, some secrecy will be revealed during that time, and that will have a direct aspect on the native's career, native herself, native's dhanasthanamo, kutumbasthanamo, sukhasthanamo, and some sort of a direct or an indirect relationship impact to her sibling or by her sibling, which is her brother. And then during the election period, this particular black remark keeps going on, and somewhere by end of when the sun Antardasa, sun Mahadasa and sun Antardasa ends somewhere by June of 15th, that particular impact will be stabilized. And even though the NATO gets NATO's party will not be getting a bumping majority to form a stable independent government, so the NATO has to do some trading. That will be starting somewhere in the end of May and goes all the way till 15th of June, and it looks positive until that point. All of a sudden something might go wrong, and once the moon Antardasa starts on June 15th or close to June 15th of 2024, the whatever the unity that they have, they think that they can form it to they can get united to form a government, will be collapsed, and the NATO will end up with no strength to form a stable government, and that would be resulting in the NATO not to be the leader of this country. These are my conclusions based on the birth chart and the details that I got it, and to the best of my knowledge. Please use this presentation for educational purposes only. Thank you for watching my video.